But first, we have to start with a hot mess that is Manchester United. Two very heavy home defeats in front of the Old Trafford faithful just this week. And everyone's wondering what on earth is going on with Erik Ten Hag and company. So much so that we had our boys on the show on ESPN FC try tactics. And this is what Shaka had to say.
Does it matter, Shaq? Does it matter who you bring in? Are you so far down that rabbit hole of doom that no one can help you?
I think it makes a difference certainly in the short term. And here's the issue with Manchester United. While everybody can argue as to exactly what's the root cause of this apathy, to use Steve's word, around the club, the only thing we know for certain is, well, sitting from a Manchester United perspective, this can't continue. Something has to change. I'm saying that with my Newcastle hat on. I'm loving every minute of it. But this certainly can't continue. So something has to change. And right now, given the Glazers' positioning, they aren't going too far right now. Given a lot of the upper boardroom, they are still waiting to figure out what their own futures are. And as we know, and as time has taught us, you can't just change an entire squad. So unfortunately, Ten Hag is the easy short-term fix for what is a very deep-rooted and long-term problem.
There you have it. So very deep-rooted and long-term problem there. Shaka, just to continue on your words from there, I suppose, because if we're honest, what's going wrong at Manchester United has been a question that we've been asking pretty much for the better part of 10 years since Sir Alex Ferguson announced his retirement. And then that kind of just showed all of the cracks that is under this great historic club. But you mentioned the owners there. You mentioned probably not getting the right managers. You mentioned also the fact that there are a lot of players that probably don't fit the Manchester United system. Is it just everything we're seeing wrong now, just a culmination of all of that in one?
Yeah, I think there's a lot has been wrong and quite possibly for quite some time. But Sir Alex Ferguson showed how good a manager he was in keeping that together, in making up for deficiencies where they may have been elsewhere in the club. Saying that, under the Glazers' ownership, and you can't put this on anybody but them, things like the facilities have deteriorated. They haven't spent on the upkeep of Old Trafford. And while, yes, we are talking about 11 men running around in a football field, I still think that so many of these issues play into who the club are and the performances that you get on a match day. That just quite simply, from a Manchester United perspective, simply haven't been good enough. And Jan Ager Fjortoft on yesterday's show, I thought did a wonderful job of running through the managers since Alex Ferguson and how they have been accomplished, how they've been different and they tried to go down different avenues, but all with the same result of a Manchester United failing to, well, either live up to expectations in terms of league finishes, or even when they do finish higher up the league, as they did with Jose Mourinho in finishing second, and maybe you could even say the top four finish last season under Ten Hag, that some of the football hasn't been thrilling to watch, and you would know that more than anybody as a Manchester United fan, Alexis. So that coming together of both performances and results, and while results have been, well, occasionally good enough, the performances for probably since Alex Ferguson simply haven't.
Well, we know that James, of course, covers our London clubs from top to bottom. But one thing that I do know about James is that in his off time, he does have a soft spot for Manchester United as well.
That's his fault. Everybody has a fault.
Everyone has a fault. I know he doesn't want to say it because he's ever the consummate professional. But James, you also are a Manchester United fan. I'm sure you watched them through years where they played that beautiful football, made so many fans fall in love with them. Now, especially after these back-to-back heavy defeats at home, to Newcastle and to Manchester City, even though many people did expect them to lose. Does this feel like a new rock bottom, and where has it all gone wrong for Ten Hag?
It's not really a new rock bottom. It's just we're back in another part of the same cycle that each manager before or since Sir Alex Ferguson has been in. And I think my view on this is that I think people are conflating two different arguments. One is that Manchester United as a football club have not modernised away from the manager being the sole arbiter of all decision making at the football club. It's the same issue that Arsenal had under Arsene Wenger, but the reason why they're kind of in the position they're in is that they did make a lot of ruthless decisions. They appointed things like they put 9 new department heads in to head up the recruitment, to sort out the sports science, to sort out the commercial side, to sort out all these different elements of the club. They put in these department heads and essentially created these mini fiefdoms and gradually stripped away the complete autonomy that Arsene Wenger had at the club. Now, that created some problems, and obviously there were issues with Unai Emery when he came in, and Mikel Arteta's had quite a lot to deal with in the time that he's been there. But Manchester United have continued to rely on one man being the sole arbiter of the club, and there isn't another Premier League team, really, a top Premier League side that acts like this now. Pep Guardiola, of course, has come in and been very successful at Manchester City, and it's very much moulded in his image. But they appointed senior executives who'd worked with him before to help shape the squad, to develop an identity and a style of play. It's similar with Klopp at Liverpool, but of course he would owe a lot of his credit to the success that he's had to people like Michael Edwards, who've been able to head up the recruitment side. And again, they've been able to mould and identify a clear image, yes, around the manager, but with that support network that already exists, adapting to the manager they have. Manchester United have simply just gone one manager after another and said, okay, who do you want to buy? Let's bring them in. And then they've spent big. You know, you think about Louis van Gaal, you know, Daley Blind, for example, a very Louis van Gaal signing. You want him to be your kind of marshal guy in the dressing room and to manage the team. Okay, we'll bring him in. Well, as soon as Louis van Gaal leaves, he doesn't want Daley. The next manager doesn't want Daley Blind. Think about Jose Mourinho, Romelu Lukaku, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Paul Pogba. These kind of big personalities, big signings, very much tailored to Jose Mourinho, not to Manchester United specifically. And they've done it exactly the same again now with Erik Ten Hag. They've given him players like Antony. No one at Manchester United would have signed Antony if it hadn't have been for Erik Ten Hag. They certainly wouldn't have paid the kind of money that they ended up paying Ajax for him. I think everybody can agree they've overpaid for him, no matter what he ends up doing between now and the end of his Manchester United career. And so they've time and time again lurched from, well, let's just decide to give the manager what they want. And so when the manager starts to lose games, they've got nowhere to go because there's no identity to fall back on. And the players know it. And this is the other issue. The players know it because there's not that infrastructure around the manager. The players know that if the manager starts to get under pressure, well, he's not going to be around. And as Shaka says, it's easier to get rid of a manager than it is half the squad. So I'm not saying they've downed tools, but it does look like in some of the recent matches that they're not even doing the basics. They're not running, they're not marking, they're not pressing with anywhere near the same intensity. And it does feel as though, you know, when people talk about there's no identity or style of play to Manchester United this season, we weren't saying that last year. There was a structure to what Ten Hag was doing. But I think what's happened is, and I'm not as close to it as someone like Rob Dawson or Mark Ogden would be, but it does seem to me that what's happened is, and I'm not saying it was just this, but ever since the Jadon Sancho incident, when he decided to ostracise a player and essentially publicly call him out for not training hard enough, not being professional, it seems as though those players have decided, well, actually, we don't know whether this manager's the right guy for us. We're not sure whether, you know, who's next, who's he going to take on next. And you can rule with that iron fist and you can ostracise players and you can decide that you want to try and move players on if you're winning games. If you're not winning games, you start to alienate a significant swathe of the dressing room. And once you get there, it's very, very difficult to row back and win it back. So I do think there's two parts to this. There's one which is the United reliance on that manager model, which is very antiquated, very out of date now. And the other is the Ten Hag issue of this of not losing the dressing room, but simply not being able to command the authority when you're not getting the results.
Well, we could talk about Manchester United and their problems from now till kingdom come, but we do have to move on to a juicy match in the Premier League this weekend. But before we do, just to wrap up Man United, Shaka, I just want to get your take on, because we sit down and we talk so much about United's problems and everyone's wondering what exactly is the solution? What can Erik Ten Hag do to stop this destruction, I suppose, that it feels like it's going on at Old Trafford?
I'm not sure what Ten Hag does at this point, and I think he's used up a lot of his equity from last season in some fairly odd press conferences, or if you want to call it conferences, utterings at the very least. None more so than starting Maguire and Evans and saying, or Evans over Varane and saying it was tactics. I mean, I'm not sure what anybody's supposed to read into that. And as James says, once you start losing the faith of the dressing room in the way that it seems he has, it's really hard to put that genie back in the bottle. So I'm not sure exactly where he goes from here. This is a team that I'm underperforming is as nice as a statement as I can put around it. And while, yes, Alexis, you're right in saying, well, if you lose to Manchester City, it's one thing. But then you lose a derby, you look for a response, and the response comes in the form of that performance at home to Newcastle, albeit in the cup, albeit you made changes, but so did Newcastle. It just points to far more deep-rooted player or team problems than I'm not sure Ten Hag has done a very good job of publicly addressing. Let me see. I don't know what he's saying behind the scenes, but publicly, it's not been at all convincing.